I'm going to tell you something I have never said out loud to another person. For 3 years, I sat at that table, their table. I ate their food. I listened to their jokes. I watched Patricia, my wife's mother, look at me the way you look at a stain you haven't decided how to address yet. Not a person, an embarrassment with manners. And every single Sunday, I drove across town, walked through that front door, and let it happen. I smiled. Every time. Not because I was weak, not because I hadn't noticed, because I needed them to keep doing it. They called me a driver, a taxi man, Diana's poor decision that hadn't corrected itself yet. They said it casually, the way people say things they've already decided are facts, too comfortable to bother with volume control. Patricia said the word driver in the same flat register other women use for disappointment. And she said it about her son-in-law, to her daughter, from the other side of a kitchen wall she didn't realize was too thin. Diana heard every syllable. She rinsed a dish, said nothing. I want you to hold that image. A woman washing dishes while her mother quietly dismantles her husband through a wall. I'll come back to it. Because that image turns out to be the whole story compressed into one moment. Here's what that family didn't know. Here's what I spent 3 years making sure nobody under that roof ever found out. And here's why, at the end of this story, Patricia was sitting in my living room, in a house she could no longer afford to lose, with her hands folded in her lap like a woman who's just played her last card and knows it. Stay with me, because this gets significantly uglier before it gets good. And it gets very good. My name is Marcus. When I met Diana, I was driving a taxi. That part is 100% accurate. Every assumption that family built on top of that fact? Completely wrong. Diana walked into me outside a coffee shop on Meridian Street on a Thursday afternoon. Wasn't watching where she was going, wasn't looking up from her phone. Dumped an entire iced coffee straight down my jacket. She went pale. Started apologizing before she even registered what she'd hit. I told her to sit down and buy me a replacement. We talked for 4 hours. She was warm in a way that genuinely surprised me. Not performed warmth, not the social warmth of someone being polite because the situation demands it, but the kind that actually costs something. She asked real questions and waited for the real answers. She laughed at things that were actually funny, rather than at things that signaled her taste. By the time I drove away that night, I already knew I was in trouble. What I didn't understand yet was what came attached to her. Patricia, my future mother-in-law. The kind of woman who identifies your profession the way a cardiologist checks your pulse, reflexively, clinically, because the data determines the diagnosis. She volunteers with 2 charities, lunches with women who share the same hair, the same shoes, and the same exhausted opinions about everything outside their zip code. She has spent 30 years treating her husband's inherited family money as a personal accomplishment. The type who is visibly, demonstrably gracious to service staff in public, then dissects them the moment the restaurant door closes. You know this woman. You have met this woman. Gerald, quieter. Don't let the quiet fool you into thinking it's neutral. It isn't. Gerald doesn't insult you to your face. He simply discusses you in the third person while you are sitting 6 feet away, as if your physical presence is a courtesy everyone's agreed to pretend is necessary. He shook my hand the first time like a man stamping a rejection letter. Once. Firm. Then turned back to his football game and did not address me directly for the rest of that evening. Not once. And then there is Simone, Diana's younger sister by 4 years. I'm going to get to Simone. I'll get there deliberately, because what I need to say about Simone is complicated, and I have not entirely untangled my own feelings about it even now. I want to be accurate rather than convenient. The first time I pulled up to their house, I was in the cab. My personal car was in the shop. 48 hours? 2 days? I didn't think it would matter. I watched Patricia pull back the front window curtain before I reached the path. By the time the door opened, I could feel the temperature of the verdict that had already been returned. She looked at the cab, then at me, then at Diana, and she smiled. "So you drive for a living?" Not, "What do you do?" Not, "Tell me about yourself." She went straight for the artery and dressed it up as small talk. "Among other things," I said. She smiled. You know that particular smile. Maybe you have a version of it somewhere in your own family. The one that says, "I've already decided, but I'll give you the dignity of the formality." Warm on the surface, cold enough in the center to preserve meat. Gerald shook my hand like he was stamping a document. Once. Final. Then turned away. Furniture. I was furniture from the first handshake. Patricia was worse than Gerald because Patricia was conversational about it. She talked around me, past me, about me to Diana, while I was standing in the kitchen doorway with a drink I had poured myself because nobody offered. She'd ask Diana about her week and then pivot, "Is Marcus thinking about doing anything more long-term, or..." and let it hang there, incomplete, doing every bit of work she intended. I excused myself to use the bathroom at one point and came back to find Diana and her mother deep in something that stopped when I entered the room. The specific silence that descends when conversation about you is interrupted by you. I walked to the couch. I sat down. Patricia picked up her wine glass and said, with precise, cheerful redirection, "Diana tells me you know the city well." My wife didn't meet my eyes. That was night one. Something else happened that first evening, though. Simone. She was the only person in that house who looked at me without that particular brand of polite contempt. What she looked at me with was harder to name. Something that felt like curiosity with edges, curiosity that knew what it was doing. When Diana went to help in the kitchen, Simone moved into the chair beside me without being invited, leaned forward and said, low, like we were sharing something that didn't belong to the room, "Don't take it personally. They do this to everyone Diana brings home." Then she smiled. A different smile than her mother's. Not a performance, something that felt realer. And she held eye contact approximately 2 full beats longer than the sentence required. I filed it. Didn't examine it yet. 14 months later, Diana and I got married. Small ceremony. I pushed for it specifically. Patricia wanted something photographable, something she could describe to her luncheon circle and watch them nod approvingly. Something that functioned as a social calendar event, something appropriately sized. I said no. She spent the 2 weeks before the date making calls I wasn't meant to know about, trying to expand the guest list through Diana. She called it, on the phone with her sister, a taxi driver's wedding. She didn't know I was in the hallway. Maybe she wouldn't have modulated even if she had. Diana was in the next room when it happened. She heard it. She came out 10 minutes later and asked if I wanted tea. That was the first real door I felt close. Not a slam, not even a click. More like the faint compression of a seal going cold. Something that wouldn't open easily again. I didn't know that yet. I told myself she just hadn't heard clearly. I was still doing that, building small scaffolding over holes I didn't want to look at directly. Would you have said something? Right then, in that moment? Or would you have taken the tea and kept going? Be honest with yourself before you answer that. Here is what none of them knew. 3 years before Diana, I had started buying property. Nothing glamorous, a distressed duplex in a neighborhood that was just beginning to attract attention from people with better information than sentiment. I fixed it myself over 4 weekends, found tenants, reinvested every dollar of the return into a second building, then a third, then a stake in a commercial transport partnership that, on paper, made me an employer while I was still personally behind one of the wheels. I kept driving because I wanted to. There's something about working a city at 5 a.m., moving through it while it's still deciding what kind of day it's going to be, picking up strangers at the edges of moments that matter to them, that kept me sharper than any office had. But I owned part of that fleet. Most of those drivers were sending their hours to a company that I held equity in. Diana knew I had investments. She knew money wasn't tight. But I had made a deliberate choice in the early months, before I understood what I was marrying into, to keep specifics quiet. I had learned from a previous relationship that the moment people understand your net worth, they stop encountering you and start encountering a figure. They calibrate to the number. The number enters the room before you do. I wanted to know who Diana was before any of that could interfere with the information. So when Patricia called me a driver, I let her. When Gerald talked about me in the third person from across a dinner table, I let him. I told myself, they don't matter. Diana matters. The marriage matters. But Diana was changing. It happened the way erosion happens, gradual, daily, almost imperceptible until the day you look back and the shoreline is somewhere you don't recognize. She started finishing her mother's sentences before Patricia had to, started making wistful, comparative comments about our apartment, about what friends had, about space, about what a different stage of life looked like. Started relaying Gerald's career opinions to me as if I had invited the consultation. "He means well," she'd say when I went quiet. "Does he?" Subject changed. Then she asked me not to pick her up in the cab when her work colleagues might see. Once, at first, then a second time. "It's just complicated to explain," she said. "People see the car and they make assumptions, and then I spend the whole dinner correcting the picture, and it's just exhausting." I asked her, carefully, what picture she was correcting exactly. She looked out the window. "Diana. Can we not do this tonight?" And I let it go. The way you let things go when you are not ready to have the conversation that answering would require. When you know that pushing the door open all the way means dealing with what's on the other side of it. Maybe I should have pushed sooner. Maybe I was telling myself it was patience when it was actually avoidance. I'll give you that one. The family dinners got uglier in direct proportion to how comfortable they grew with my presence. In the beginning, the contempt was professional, calibrated, deniable. By year 2, Gerald had stopped maintaining the performance. He said it with Diana sitting right beside him, not looking up from her plate. "Diana needs real stability, Marcus. A foundation. Something she can grow into. A man who's building something that lasts." Building something. I nodded slowly, kept my face perfectly still. Let him have it. Patricia worked the other side. She'd have conversations about me with Diana while I was 6 feet away holding cutlery. As though my presence was a technicality everyone had agreed to observe without it meaning anything. "You shouldn't be carrying the household alone, sweetheart." A practiced glance in my direction, calibrated to land without being undeniable. Especially with an uncertain income structure. Uncertain. Then came the dinner that made everything before it look like warm-up. Gerald brought his business partner. Older man, property developer, the golf and handshake network that Patricia considered legitimate society. Gerald made introductions around the table. He reached me and said, without breaking conversational pace, "This is Marcus. He's in transportation." Transportation. Not my name, not my son-in-law. Transportation. Like a category. Like a vehicle classification. The man smiled the distracted smile of someone already sorting the room for who matters. Diana laughed at something her mother said approximately 4 seconds later. Bright, easy, her social laugh. The one I used to find warm and now, in that moment, couldn't locate the warmth in. I sat with that for 3 days afterward. At what point would you have said something? I'm genuinely asking. Because I keep turning that evening over, and I still don't know what the right move was. And then, because there was always Simone, hovering at exactly the intersection of the public performance and whatever she actually was underneath it, she found me in the hallway between the dining room and the kitchen, while Diana was occupied and her parents were out of sight. She stepped closer than was architecturally required. "Are you actually all right in there?" Low, direct. No social cushioning. "Because I watch you sit through these dinners, Marcus, and I think I genuinely cannot understand how you do it. They're not subtle. They're not even trying anymore." Her hand on my arm. Light. Brief. Chosen. She held the eye contact. Then, "She likes men she can explain. She always has. She doesn't know what to do with someone she can't reduce." I didn't answer. She didn't wait for one. "I'm going to tell you something uncomfortable. I knew what Simone was doing. I knew it the way you know weather is coming. Not the details, but the direction. Whether she'd fully admitted it to herself was another question. But here is the truth of it, and I'm not going to dress it up. I was so consistently denied basic dignity in that house that even Simone's particular brand of it, complicated, loaded, not entirely clean, felt like oxygen. Not flattering to admit, but accurate. That's the moment I understood this family wasn't just snobbish. Something in it was genuinely, structurally rotten. Christmas dinner. Gerald had been drinking. Diana and Patricia were in the kitchen. I could hear them laughing about something. That particular relaxed laugh people have when they're fully comfortable, fully home. Gerald sat across from me in the quiet of the dining room, leaned back in his chair with the posture of a man who considers his opinions a form of generosity to the people receiving them, looked me directly in the face and delivered it slowly, like he wanted each word to arrive separately. I never thought my daughter was the type to settle. But here we are, Marcus. Here we are. The room held its breath. I looked at him. Long, even. Here we are, I said, and I smiled at him. Not nerves, not social performance, something colder than that. The particular stillness of a man who is holding information that would change everything in this room if he chose to use it, and has decided, for now, not to. He didn't know how to process it. He was supposed to see shame or anger or the particular collapse of a man who's been correctly identified. He got none of those things. He got the smile. Good. He wasn't supposed to understand it yet. I wish I could tell you Diana defended me. She came back into the dining room 60 seconds later carrying dessert plates, completely unaware of what had just happened at her table. Or maybe not completely unaware. I've stopped being certain which version is worse. 6 months after Christmas, Diana said she needed space. We'd been arguing about her family, about what she was allowing them to become inside our marriage, about what she was starting to become. She used the phrase, resistance to growth. When I asked her to define that, she told me her mother felt I lacked ambition. Her mother's assessment of her husband. You're using your mother's vocabulary to describe your marriage, I said. I'm forming my own opinions. But I could hear Patricia underneath Diana's voice like a second audio track, slightly out of sync, same rhythm, same architecture of contempt, just more softly upholstered. 3 years of Sunday dinners and weeknight phone calls and private conversations I had never been invited to had done something to the woman I married, and I was sitting across from the result. Then she said something I still turn over in my hands when I'm trying to understand what love actually is, and what it costs, and what it's willing to spend. She didn't say it cruelly. Cruel would have been easier. She said it quietly, with something that looked almost like grief, like she'd been carrying it for months and was finally setting it down. Do you know how exhausting it is to explain you to people? Every single time someone asks what you do, I watch them do the math. I see the calculation happen, and I see the answer they land on, and I'm so tired. I'm so tired of walking into a room already knowing what people are going to think, already bracing for the conversation, already knowing I'm going to spend the next hour managing someone else's confusion about my husband. I need someone I can feel proud of, Marcus. I need a husband who doesn't require a footnote. Is that really so terrible to say? I remember the specific quality of the silence before I answered. I remember thinking, she's telling me she's ashamed of me. She used the word tired because ashamed wouldn't come out. Tired is softer. Tired implies she's still trying. I remember thinking, she already left. She moved out emotionally weeks ago and is only now collecting her things. You never had to apologize for me, I said. Not once. That was always your choice. She moved back to her parents' house 18 days later. Temporary. Just to breathe. Just to think. I didn't beg. Didn't follow her down the hall. Didn't give her the desperation she might have found clarifying. I went back through the apartment she had just emptied of half its warmth, sat in the silence she left, and thought more clearly than I had in months about every single thing I had built. Methodically, quietly, patiently, while they were occupied deciding what my ceiling was. Would you have chased her? I still don't know what I was. Strong? Or just finally done? Some days I think they're the same thing. Some days I don't. 3 weeks after Diana left, a mutual friend mentioned something offhand, the kind of casual comment people make without understanding what they're handing you. Patricia and Gerald's house. That house. The one where Patricia had assessed me from behind a pulled curtain before I reached the front path. Where Gerald had told me at his Christmas table that his daughter had settled. Where I had spent 3 years swallowing Sunday afternoons with a smile I was building for a specific purpose. It was leveraged, severely. Gerald had borrowed hard against it. Not small money hard, structural hard. The kind of position that requires things to keep moving in your favor or it unravels fast. He borrowed to fund investments he had described at those dinners with the comfortable authority of a man who was very secure about the gap between himself and men like me. Real stability, his words, a foundation. The investments had quietly, thoroughly collapsed the previous year. The note was due. They could not cover it. I sat with that information for 3 days alone, told no one, just thought, let the weight of it find its shape. Then I made calls, the quiet kind, the kind you can make when you've spent 6 years building relationships in commercial real estate while the people at your dinner table were busy cataloging your professional inadequacies. I found out who held the note. I made an offer. I bought it. I've had a long time to examine my own motivations, and I'm going to give you the honest version rather than the one that makes me look clean. The investment was legitimate. Solid numbers, sound position, the property was worth more than the debt. A professional decision by any measure. But I also understood exactly what it meant. The moment they found out, every assumption that family had ever made about me would have to be completely rebuilt from scratch, into something that looked like a very different picture. So yes, I knew what I was doing. You decide what that makes me. I'm not going to pretend the question is clean. They found out on a Tuesday. Diana called first. She was crying before she finished my name. That specific kind of crying where the words break apart, where the air comes in the wrong places. Marcus, my parents, they got paperwork, some property company. They have to vacate by end of the month. My dad can't... Marcus, please, do you know anything about this? I let her finish. Let the question sit in the line for one full beat. Then, I know who bought it. Dead air. Marcus, come here. Bring your parents. We do this in person. They arrived 3 days later. Patricia came in wearing the expression of a woman who has mentally prepared herself to submit, but only as far as absolutely required to get what she came for. She had rehearsed the version of this she could survive. She expected to find me in the apartment she had spent 3 years quietly describing as modest, using the word as a scalpel. She expected to be gracious, to ask, to receive, to leave with most of her dignity reassembled. She had dressed carefully. That detail mattered to me. She had dressed for an audience with a man she still expected to need impressing. Gerald was something else. He came in pale, stripped. The authority he'd worn for 3 years like a tailored suit was simply gone. He looked like a man who'd walked through a door expecting a familiar room and found the floor had changed completely. Simone came. She stood near the back wall and watched me with an expression I couldn't fully decode. Not the dinner table performance, not the loaded private warmth from the hallways. Something else, something more exposed. I offered coffee. Patricia said yes. Her hands were folded on her knees like she was sitting for a judgment she'd already guessed the outcome of. I put the documents on the coffee table and let the room find them. Gerald looked at the papers, then at me, then at the papers again, then back at me with the specific expression of a man whose entire working theory of a situation has just been invalidated. You, he said. Just that. Like the word cost him something. I've been in real estate 6 years, I said. Even, calm. the specific calm of a man with nothing left to prove. Residential, commercial, mixed use. The company on your paperwork, I hold a position in it. When your note became available, I was in a position to move on it. So I moved. Patricia's face cycled through something I will not forget. Confusion. Then recognition. The way recognition looks when it's also an indictment. Disbelief. Then something trying to be dignity and landing short of it. "You had money," she said, almost to herself. "This whole time. All of this time, you had—" "I had a business," I said. "A real one. Built from nothing, without anyone's help, without anyone's family money, without anyone's approval or endorsement. The kind of business that doesn't require anyone's permission to be legitimate." "Then why—" and she stopped. Patricia, who had not once in 3 years run out of words when the subject was me, sat in my living room and could not complete a sentence. I finished it for her. "Why did I keep driving?" I said. "Because I own part of the fleet. Because some of us work for reasons beyond necessity. And because I never required your definition of success to know that I'd achieved mine. You needed me to be just a driver. That was never my problem. That was yours." I turned to Gerald. "You sat at your table and told me your daughter had settled. Christmas dinner. You looked me in the face and said it slowly so I wouldn't miss a word." He didn't answer. "You didn't misread me," I said. "You reduced me, deliberately. You built a smaller version of me that fit the story this family needed, because the accurate version would have made things too complicated, and complicated was inconvenient. And I let you do it. I let you keep going for 3 years, because I wanted to know exactly what kind of people you were when you thought there were no consequences for it. I let that sit in the room. Now you know who I am. I knew who you were a long time ago." Gerald put his face in his hands. The sound that came out of him was not quite anything I have a clean name for. Diana was in the corner, not calculating, not composing herself, just crying. The helpless kind. The kind that comes when the ground shifts and your body hasn't caught up yet. Like she was grieving something. Maybe the version of me she'd decided I was. Maybe the version of herself she'd let Patricia build over 3 years of Sunday dinners. Simone stood at the back of the room and watched me, and on her face, "I'm going to tell you exactly what was there and let you decide what it means," was something that looked like recognition. The kind that comes with a cost. Like she was looking at someone she'd always known, and was only now admitting she'd known. That was the moment I realized Simone was the most dangerous person in that room. Not because of what she'd done, because of how clearly she saw everything, and had always chosen what to do with that clarity based on what was convenient for her. What followed in the next hour is harder to describe than the confrontation itself. Patricia apologized. Formally, structurally, the architecture of an apology delivered by someone who rehearsed it in the car and is now performing the prepared version, hitting marks, producing the words that are supposed to function as repair. She said she had only ever wanted what was best for Diana, that she had misunderstood the situation, that she hoped we could move forward. Move forward. She reached for my hand when she said it, a practice gesture, warm on the surface, cold in its calculation. I let her make it. I didn't squeeze back. Gerald said almost nothing through the property discussion. He sat in a chair in my living room with the stillness of a man who's just understood that the game he believed he was playing had different rules than he'd been told, on a board he'd never actually been shown. When the associate I'd brought finished walking him through the terms, Gerald looked at me from across the room and said, finally and quietly, "I underestimated you." 3 words, as if that were proportionate. As if that covered the Christmas dinner and the birthday party where he described me as transportation to his colleague, and 3 years of Sunday table contempt delivered across the cutlery. I said, "Yes, you did." And I left it there. Simone said nothing during the formal meeting. When her parents went outside with my associate to finalize terms, she stayed in the room. Just us. She looked at me across the space between us for a long moment. No performance, no loaded warmth, no calculated intimacy. Something that looked, for the first time since I'd known her, like actual accountability sitting uncomfortably on her face. Of the four of them, that was the one that surprised me most. Diana waited until the room fully cleared. Then she looked at me the way you look at someone when you're trying to reconcile two different people, the person you thought they were and the person the last hour has revealed, and failing to make them fit. "Did you know it would come to this?" she asked. "I knew the investment was sound." "Marcus, that's not what I'm asking, and you know it." I held her gaze. "I knew more than anyone in this family ever gave me credit for. I always did. The question I keep coming back to is why it took a property deed for you to wonder whether that was possible." She didn't answer. I'm not sure I wanted her to. A week later, Diana called and asked if we could start over. She said she'd been wrong, that she'd let her parents' voices crowd out her own until she couldn't tell the difference anymore, that she saw me clearly now, the real version, and she wanted to know if there was anything left between us worth rebuilding. And here's the part I haven't told anyone. I almost said yes immediately. The way you do when someone you love offers you an opening and your body makes the decision before your mind can catch up. I had my phone in my hand. I almost called her back that same night. I didn't. Because the night before I was going to call, I got a message. Not from Diana, from Simone. "I know I'm the last person who should be messaging you right now, but I've been sitting with this for a week and I can't leave it alone. I always knew you were more than what they said you were. From the first night, I knew. I just chose not to make it my problem. I laughed at the dinners. I made it easier for myself by making it easier for them, and I let you take it. That wasn't passive. That was a choice I made every time, and I'm more sorry for it than I know how to say out loud." I read it twice, then a third time. I didn't respond, but it stayed with me, in a way I am not comfortable with, for reasons I am not entirely willing to name out loud. Because what Simone was describing wasn't confusion, it was a choice. Every laugh at that dinner table, a choice. Every time she found me alone in the hallway and was warm and close and real, also a choice. She had two versions of herself available, and she deployed them based on what was useful to her in the moment. And I had spent 3 years on the receiving end of both without fully deciding what that meant. And then there was Diana. Does she love the man she married? The one she grew embarrassed to drive next to? The one whose job required a footnote at parties? The one she asked not to pick her up in the visible car? Or does she love the man on the property documents? The one who suddenly makes sense to people like her mother? The one whose existence needs no translation? The one she can finally be proud of in the way she told me she needed? Because I need you to understand something. Those aren't different men. I never changed. She changed what she was willing to see. And at 2 a.m, when I'm honest enough to ask the question I keep finding in the dark, if I had never bought that house, if Gerald's note had been held by someone else, if none of the documents had landed on that table, would Diana be asking to come back? If the answer is no, then the love she's offering me now isn't a return. It's a revision. Would you take her back? I'm asking you genuinely, and I want you to actually sit with it before you answer. Not the righteous answer, the real one. Because here's the final piece. Simone messaged me again this morning. I saw the notification before I was fully awake, and I sat there in bed and looked at my phone for a long moment before I opened it. It wasn't an apology this time. It wasn't reflection or accountability or anything that could be filed away cleanly under "she's trying to make amends." It was an invitation. Specific. Unambiguous. The kind of message that cannot be misread and is not trying to be. And I haven't said no yet. I'm not sure what that says about me. I know what it says about Simone. And I know what it says about this family. That even now, even after everything that happened in that room, the most honest version of anyone in it might be the one who's been the most dangerous all along. Diana is still waiting for my answer. Simone is still waiting for mine. And me, I'm sitting here asking myself whether the two most important women in this story are teaching me something about loyalty or just showing me the same lesson with different packaging. And I genuinely don't know which answer is worse.